Coming up this week on The Right Side, Christy Clark surprisingly resigns in BC, poor journalism on the Unity Agreement in Alberta, Petronas cancels an $11.4 billion investment in Prince Rupert, and Rolling Stone's glowing piece on Trudeau actually has a lot of errors. What else are they wrong about? This is The Right Side, episode 27, recorded Saturday, July 29th, 2017. The Angel from Above. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another episode of The Right Side this weekend. Patrick and myself are here, as we are every weekend. Welcome back.
Good to be back. Good to give you the right side of the news, of course.
And that entails cutting through bias, sensationalism, and things that are just, well, this week, let's just say, outrageous in the mainstream media for some of our stories. So that's what we aim to do, come at things from the center and see if we can arrive at something that, well, that's the actual core of the story, but the mainstream media tends to miss by their sensationalizing and use of biased words and sources in their stories. So that's what we're going to do this week. We got what looks like a pretty interesting show lined up. So you ready to kick us off with some surprising or maybe unsurprising BC news?
Yeah, well, it's kind of surprising, but then again, it's kind of not. So for those who don't know, Christy Clark resigned as the leader of the BC Liberal Party, and up until a few weeks ago, it was pretty much known that she was going to stay on as leader of the opposition, but she decided on Friday to make a surprising resignation of both the leader of the BC Liberals and as an MLA of Kelowna West, which will give the one-seat majority of the Green-backed NDP government at least a year of breathing room. And without a permanent leader, the BC Liberals are unlikely to challenge the government on a motion of non-confidence. That Clark didn't stick around for the mini-budget the NDP government will have to bring down in September and a full budget in February, which were prime opportunities for the government to fall, was a surprise to political scientist Hamish Telford of the University of Fraser Valley. He says, quote, "Going from premier to leader of the opposition was surely a letdown for her, but the NDP was going to have a very precarious grip on power, and I thought that under the circumstances she would stick around, and the party would want her to stick around for those budgets," Telford said. However, Telford said that the NDP's grace period will be short because eventually a by-election will have to be called in West Kelowna, and the Liberals will almost certainly win the seat again. Now, those who might remember me talking about this, Clark originally said that she would stay on as opposition leader, but before being defeated in a confidence motion on June 29th, Clark said she intended to stay on as to, quote, "whatever job voters give me and the House gives me." So you might remember that this isn't the only surprise reversal that Clark has done in recent months. Listeners will recall the story I did back on episode 22 where I detailed the Frankenstein throne speech where Clark's Liberals reversed policy decisions and in some cases lifted them directly from the NDP and Green platforms. It's something that Gary Mason of the Globe and Mail actually rightly states that contributed to her downfall in the legislature. He wrote, quote, "In theory, this was supposed to make it more difficult for the opposition to team up to defeat the Liberals in a confidence vote. Unfortunately, all it did was make Miss Clark and her government look ridiculous and desperate to cling to power." And I think, even though that might be a bit sensationalist, I think it's probably true in this case because it did certainly not do the job that was expected of Clark, and it didn't really sway voters to her side, I think, because it made it look like she was flip-flopping on a lot of different things and she was just trying to stay in power, which obviously she was just trying to stay in power, but she didn't really do herself any favors on it, I think.
And okay, go ahead.
Yeah. You go for it.
All right. Anytime it comes to a quote flip-flop kind of situation like that, that can either be seen as a brilliant maneuver if it works, but if it doesn't, it looks like a desperate grab for power and weak leadership, which, almost certainly played a role in what happened here. And I think in a situation that the party was in and the government was in after the election, having lost what could have been a majority government by 9 votes in one riding and many other close seats. Well, not many. I think it was on the order of 3 to 4, right?
Yeah, but 3 to 4 is quite a few.
Right, exactly.
In this
so
certain
many.
scenario.
If you lose like that, that is not the time for flip-flopping and an apparent lack of leadership. It is a time to focus down and be the leader of that party. Make decisive decisions, regardless of whatever the opposition might think. And who knows, things could have turned out differently maybe if certain things were acted on sooner. Campaign finance reform, maybe, if that was addressed in the throne speech. Maybe the outcome of the lieutenant governor meeting could have been different. Maybe the outcome of negotiations with the Greens could have been different. Who knows?
Yeah, I think the fact that she basically stuck to her guns all the way through up until the actual election, and then decided to flip back and forth on a lot of different issues to try and appeal to the opposition to let them vote for them. I think at that point the opposition, there was no chance of them going to be voting for them. So I think at that point she should have just stuck with the line and and just went for what the principal decision would be, which would be to stick with what the plurality of voters voted for, and that would have been her party and her platform. But in the speech she gave right before the confidence motion came through, and right after the NDP and Green agreement came through, we both kind of noted that she seemed like she was giving up in this speech. And
that's not the time to give up.
No, and this is definitely not the time to give up, especially for a leader of a party that has 41 out of the that would have had 42 out of the 48 or 87 seats or something like that.
Also,
like
someone who is currently premier, because she was premier at the time still.
Yeah, and she was still she'd been premier for about 6 years or so. So, I mean, at this point, she should not have been having that defeatist attitude, I think. But it's quite clear that after the flip-flop and the throne speech and, not doing what she probably should have done, the party didn't want that. And now she's resigned, and now they will have a new leader as the BC Liberals.
And that could probably take upwards of a year to a year and a half, unless they go for a really compressed leadership race like the United Conservatives are doing here in Alberta.
Mm-hmm. Well, the shortest amount that it would be 3 months, but it's politics. I really don't think things will take that short amount of time. So we're going to have to see what happens here. But as it stands, it looks like the NDP government that's being propped up by the Greens will continue on for a little while longer.
Alrighty then. Well, that'll definitely be interesting to follow, and be interesting to see what kind of candidates step up for that job and how the media reports on them. Because, it might not be fully aware to people, but the BC Liberal Party is not like our federal Liberal Party. You've said many times they're more of a conglomerate of free enterprise thinkers and federal liberals who have come together in a union not dissimilar to the Saskatchewan Party in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, exactly. They were basically formed to keep the NDP out of power in a way, and I think that might be what's happening in Alberta with the United Conservative Party. They're basically a union of a lot of people on the center right and the right wing, basically to stop the NDP from winning the next election there. So, I mean, it's not something that hasn't been seen before.
Yeah. Well, then, let's move on to that. Work has well begun on the new United Conservative Party here in Alberta, and as with that has all the news stories that have come out. This week there was a piece in the Edmonton Journal by Graham Thompson with the title, "Divisive Leadership Race About to Rock the Unity Boat." The byline for this story starts with the following. MLAs for the Wild Rose and Progressive Conservatives are now members of the same party. But it's not clear yet whether they are more like a band of brothers with a couple of sisters or a team of rivals. So, as you can tell here, it's clear in this story there's going to be some question about what kind of unity was established over this past weekend here. For those who might have missed last episode, both the Wild Rose and PCs voted in favor of unity, with roughly 95% of each membership base saying yes. The turnout was upwards of 57% for the Wild Rose and 55% for the PCs. The article further contains sentences such as, cue the infighting, and the article also says, just 57% of eligible Wild Rosers and 55% of PCs cast a ballot. The article further belabors this point by talking down to the reader by saying, you can't simply add those up and conclude a total of 52,000 took part. People were allowed to hold memberships in both parties and could cast a ballot in both. Then this last line of messaging is summed up with the words, considering that there are more than 2.5 million eligible voters in Alberta, it's amazing how few managed to dramatically reshape Alberta's political landscape on Saturday. The same will probably hold true for the leadership vote. So now here's some comparisons with recent votes that have gone on, specifically the federal Conservative leadership race. That race had a turnout of about 54%. So I didn't see any articles about this after that vote happened, but if the same line of reasoning that's in this Edmonton Journal piece was used for that election, should the validity of Andrew Scheer's leadership be called into question as well, because only 54% of eligible voters cast a ballot? And going back further, the 2015 Alberta election also had a turnout of about 54%. So it's concerning to the author to say, or is it concerning to the author, I would ask, how few managed to reshape Alberta's political landscape in 2015? Because those are the exact words he used when talking about the Wild Rose and PC unity vote this past weekend, when the 2015 provincial election had even less turnout. Mm-hmm. Ultimately,
yeah, and I think when it comes down to turnout, 55% with 95% voting a certain way, that's quite a bit. And even if you add the other 45% in, it probably wouldn't change very much anyways, because you'd have to think that at least some of the 45% that didn't vote would probably vote for unity anyways, right?
Yeah. And, ultimately ask yourself the question of 55+% turnout voting yes, or rather 55% turnout with 95% voting yes in each camp is a pretty clear mandate. I don't think you can get more clear than that. And
no, unless it was 100% and 100%.
There you go.
Which you're never going to get.
And, one thing is clear from this is that these two parties are going to be presenting a united front in the 2019 election. The author also calls into question about what exactly is going to happen in the leadership race. He writes, it promises to be a nasty and brutish campaign and not particularly short. Well, the core thing that you do with the leadership race or leadership campaign is that you compare ideas and differences with other people. And yes, sometimes they can be nasty, but it's a display of ideas in its purest form. That's what the leadership race is supposed to be for. And a second point on that is that the leadership race is actually short. He said it's not particularly short. Well, here's the thing. The federal Conservative leadership race ran for almost 18 months. And the race for the Progressive Conservative leadership this past last year ran for about 9 months. So in comparison, 3 months, July to October, that's pretty short. So I'm not sure exactly what that meant in the story. Also, one more thing on this here. On Monday, the United Conservative Party met for the first time as a unified caucus, and absent was PC MLA Richard Starkey. He ran for the PC leadership against Jason Kenney. He also, just to be full disclosure here, he suggested a coalition-type agreement for the 2019 election between the Wild Rose and PCs. But he has decided to not join the new party. And after Starkey announced this, the media pounced on it with much the same rhetoric we saw in the Edmonton Journal piece, assuming that infighting had started and this new party would not be able to continue going forward. So, as media, and I'm referring to all media, including us here, because we're talking about what the media is doing, we should ultimately let the new party conduct its official business and be mindful of the huge majority of people in the province who are members of this party who voted for unity. So unless major fissures appear after the leadership race, this party is likely to be successful as a united group, just as the Federal Conservative Party of Canada was in 2003. And it seems just so odd seeing this from the media, that there's so many people detracting from this and saying it's not going to work, when in reality the merger of the Progressive Conservatives and Canadian Alliance federally in the early 2000s was a much more complicated deal with many more different ideas.
Yeah, and like there is already precedence for this sort of thing in Canadian politics. So the fact that they're not only saying that the turnout didn't mean that there was a clear unity mandate, which is untrue. I would say if the turnout was under 50%, yeah, sure, maybe there's a bit of an argument there. But since it's over 50%, it's pretty clear that the people wanted unity, and especially with 95% voting for it in both parties. Maybe if there was a bit of a difference there could be a bit more question. But I think this particular article, they were trying to draw conclusions that were basically the opposite from the evidence, and that's something that you have to look at in journalism, that people are writing about these days, and that you really have to check on it to make sure that they're actually drawing the right conclusions from the evidence.
Because when you split this story apart, both of these stories, the first one from the Edmonton Journal regarding the divisive leadership race, and the second one from CTV regarding Richard Starkey, if you split these stories apart into their core constituents, there's nothing here. It's all posturing and what-if scenarios about what could go on here, by the fact that there were only 57% for the Wild Rose and 55% of the PCs to choose to vote. But in reality, it doesn't mention the point that provincial elections in Alberta have much lower turnout than this and made a much larger impact. Because, let's face it, I think going from a center-right progressive conservative government to a center-left NDP government with 54% of the province turning out to vote, that's a massive reshape of the political landscape. And percentage-wise, it's less than what happened here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Anyways, we'll have to watch this and see how it goes. But just goes to show that you need to be mindful when you're reading things, even in the Edmonton Journal.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I see we got another BC story here, but it kind of affects us all.
Yeah, it does kind of affect us all, and the biggest news probably out of BC, even taking apart the stories that came out about the bountiful BC polygamists getting charged and receiving a guilty sentence for polygamy, and the BC NDP saying that they would probably put off legislation that would be banning the big money campaign donations. And of course, Christy Clark, which we talked about earlier. I think probably the biggest story of them all was Petronas, which canceled an $11.4 billion LNG project, which would have taken place near Prince Rupert and would have provided lots of jobs and lots of investment in not just BC, but probably the country as well. So this is going to be the second major test of the Horgan NDP government, the first, of course, being the wildfires that are still burning in the province. So that will be dealing with the aftermath of Petronas, which, for those who don't know, is a major Malaysian natural gas company, and they have canceled plans to build what is known as Pacific Northwest LNG. And that was going to be on Leilu Island, which is just south of Prince Rupert. Petronas said in a statement that the decision was made following a thorough review of the project as market conditions fluctuate. quote, "Today is a very difficult day for Pacific Northwest LNG and Petronas," said Pacific Northwest LNG chairman Anwar Taib. "We are disappointed that the extremely challenging environment brought about by the prolonged depressed prices and shifts in the energy industry have led us to this decision." Taib said the formation of a new BC NDP government, which previously opposed putting the plant on Lelu Island, located near important juvenile salmon ring habitat of significance to First Nations, wasn't a factor in the decision. He said Petronas look forward to working with Premier John Horgan and would continue to look at other options to develop natural gas assets in Canada. "We continue to believe that LNG can thrive in British Columbia with the right project at the right time." Now, James Tansey, who is an associate professor with the Sauder School of Business at the University of BC, said that he had seen indications lately that Petronas was on the fence regarding the investment. Quote, "That's a function partly of maybe underestimating the complexities of getting deals done in BC, but also of longer-term low oil prices in Asia, where the oil prices are tied to the gas prices," he said. Tansey said even for a big player like Petronas, current oil prices, which are consistently below $50 US per barrel, make such investments unattractive. So while the decision by Petronas was made at a curious time in BC politics, what with the new NDP government and Christy Clark's resignation, it's noted by the media that the political climate and the variability in politics didn't have a factor on the ultimate cancellation. However, what isn't being talked about in the media absolvement of the NDP is that it's the government's job to bring business and investment to BC to create jobs. And what will be telling is how the new NDP government responds to this cancellation and how they intend to attract resource development and business to the province.
We saw a similar shift by larger companies, even Shell in Alberta, after the NDP came to power here. And, you can say that it is not related to the new government. But let's be real here, is that if you look back to election night 2016 in the U.S., everyone thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. And as soon as the indications turned that it wasn't going to be Hillary Clinton that was going to win, the stock markets took a tumble. But by the next morning they had recovered, accepting the fact that Donald Trump would be president and, hey, he might actually have good business policies for the U.S. So it definitely does have something to deal with the NDP government here. And I think the key point that you made here is that even if it doesn't on a primary means level, it is the job of the government to make an attractive investment climate for businesses in Canada and foreign businesses, because anytime there's a cash flow of money into the province from these large corporations, that ultimately fills the province's coffers, and that is good for everyone in the province. And more so because it's a natural resource project, it's good for Canada as well. So this is going to be another large test for the incoming Horgan government.
Yeah, and it's something that we've noted before is that they were basically anti-resource development in their platforms, saying that they wanted to not build pipelines, they didn't want to explore liquid natural gas development.
That stuff makes the rounds. It gets heard. Even if it's not a primary cause, it's in the back of the minds of the investors.
Yeah, and no matter what they're saying now, in that they want to attract all these big resource development companies, they're probably listening to them right now, but they were also listening to them back then too, when they said that it wasn't that big of a priority. And I think we went over the NDP government platform and what they said they wanted to bring to the table just a couple episodes ago, and it's a very different position they're taking on this in the media, of course.
I would call it hostile to resource development, that platform.
Yeah, and this, it almost seems like a flip-flop in the vein of Christy Clark and the throne speech, doesn't it?
Yes, it
in
does.
the sense that in the sense that they're trying to say now that they're for resource development and they want to work with other companies on, other natural gas assets and whatnot.
And there's an age-old adage: actions speak louder than words.
So we'll have to see what the actions of the new NDP government are and what they're going to do to respond to this, and to see if they can put what's right for Canada in front of what they may personally believe.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just think that it's very real that when you think about it in abstract talk, the premier resigning and deciding to have a switch in government, the NDP, this is probably one of the first real things that the NDP government will have to deal with, and this is something that is on the line for a lot of people. We can always state it in abstract numbers on the news and say $11.4 billion project canceled, but to a lot of people that work in the resource sector, that's their livelihood, that's their job. That could provide a lot of income for a lot of different people.
Do the NDP have any seats around Prince Rupert?
That's the other thing. They have seats on the coast, but in the interior of BC itself, they only have 2 seats outside of the coastal regions. And I believe that the Prince Rupert MLA is probably, I think they are NDP. So that would be something that the NDP there should be looking at.
Yeah, and if not, then that's a massive disservice to the people of the province and the workers in that riding. And the media should have pointed some attention on that in this story, because as a fresh government, you want to be putting on a happy face and showing that things are actually going to work, right? But we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah.
And I mean, if the NDP government really did want to be pro-business and signal that investment was going to be all right in the province, they could say that they're going to halt any increases to the province's carbon tax. That would be probably well received by businesses. So.
Yeah, and they are not halting any increases. In fact, they want to increase it probably pretty soon. So we're going to see all this come to a head in September when the legislature sits again, and we're going to see what happens, and ultimately, hopefully it works out for the best for us. We just have to cross our fingers, I suppose.
All right. Well, moving to the wider focus of Canada in the firing line segment this week, you guys might have seen that in the most recent issue of the American Rolling Stone magazine, our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has made an appearance on the front cover. The headline was, "Why Can't He Be Our President?" The article within the Rolling Stone weighed in at 6,500 words, and the author faced heavy criticism for what he wrote. There were many factual errors, which were edited out in the online piece, but of course remain in print. That's pretty interesting that the factual errors were edited out online, and yet the issue that people are going to see on newsstands is full of them still. So, All right. So here's some of the factual errors. Trudeau won an upset in 2008, made all the more significant because his Liberty Party took another national thrashing. And of course, it's the Liberal Party.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest parties in Canada that's been around since the dawn of time, practically. And not only that, but he didn't win in an upset in 2008, even if it was his, personal MP battleground. That wasn't an upset whatsoever.
No, it's Montreal.
It was pretty much expected that he would win the seat.
Next, you have to wait for them to open it, says Trudeau, pointing to his Royal Canadian Mounted Police detail. He grins a bit. It took me 6 months to figure that out. And of course, you guys know that this one is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The article even suggests that Trudeau has gone out of his way to ignore President Trump. The Liberal government, of course, has been concerned about upcoming NAFTA negotiations and has been working with the relevant U.S. departments. It should also be noted that Trudeau and Trump have had a number of significant positive interactions. So Trudeau isn't ignoring Trump. He's actually working with him quite well. Then, carrying on, the Toronto Star commented on this piece, and even they pointed out the absolute hilarity of how inaccurate it was. They say that, Donald Trump is, quote, a demonic clown, but still takes major issue with the Stone piece, the Toronto Star does. They point out the same issues that the province did, but call for more honesty in reporting Trudeau, and make an analogy that, quote, in Canada, day after day, the media hold a flamethrower to Trump's toes. But as we can see from this Rolling Stone profile, America only has a concert lighter it holds up in the darkness while cheering on Trudeau. I think that's pretty obvious about the media here and in the U.S. when it comes to covering Trump versus Trudeau as well. And I just found it really amusing here that the Toronto Star made this comparison because it's true everywhere we look.
Yeah, I mean, it is very much true, and it's funny that they made the comparison because they're one of the ones that holds up the concert lighter for Trudeau as well. When you look at all the articles about him,
yes, the Globe and Mail even got in on it, covering what the Conservatives were saying, as that Trudeau appearing on the cover of the Rolling Stones could jeopardize NAFTA talks. The argument is made that the Trudeau government probably knew how Trudeau would be portrayed in the magazine, which would ultimately draw comparisons between Trudeau and Trump. And we know that President Trump pays attention to the media, and the feeling that conservatives have is that this exclusive interview could cause perception problems with the U.S. And my question to this is, could it? I think only time will tell, and I think anyone who occupies the presidency of the United States should probably pay attention to first-person interactions over what the media is saying about his neighbor to the north. Mm-hmm. And now the Huffington Post Canada also offers their opinion on the story, and their coverage on this was just laughable. They said that this coverage, quote, makes Fox News mad. That was their main headline. The Huffington Post article also features clips from Fox News and tweets responding to Fox News. Those who watch this may see that Fox News is actually right in their reporting. If Rolling Stone is going to report on Trudeau's positives as they see them, Fox News is within their right to report on what was missed in the story, and the Omar Khadr payout has actually appeared in this coverage regarding Trudeau. And of course, the Omar Khadr payout is what we talked about for the first couple of weeks of July here. The Huffington Post article also aims to increase contrast between Trudeau and President Trump by highlighting Trump's ban on transgendered individuals in the military and the Canadian government's virtue signaling response. The Canadian government, in response to that, said that anyone is welcome to fight and join the Canadian Armed Forces. And this firing line is a prime example of why we exist here at the right side, and that is to highlight the utter garbage that is in some of these media stories. Garbage in the sense of bias and sensationalism. Like, I have been left speechless very few times while recording podcasts, and I have found hilarious stories from time to time. But this one takes the cake.
Yeah, it certainly does. The fact that they're just, praising him completely and going through glowing detail about what he does is really ignoring a lot of the other stuff that he hasn't done very well.
They can't even get the details right.
Yeah, and it seems like it does really seem like it was an American publication that published this, because they're getting very key, easy details wrong on just Canadian life in general. I think even children here could tell you that it's the Liberal Party, not the Liberty Party, and that it's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. But they're missing a lot of the things that Trudeau hasn't done well. I mean, when you think about how he was elected on a campaign of openness and free and fair and merit based,
real change,
and how he's gone through and tried to appoint partisan people to nonpartisan positions, the fact that he's gone significantly over budget and has no plans to pay down the deficit or return to surpluses in the budget.
And that he has one of the most inefficient parliaments that the country has seen, with a majority government.
Sure, maybe he's done some things good, but I think there's also some things that he hasn't done good. And I think not covering both is really doing not only a disservice to the people that read the Rolling Stone and talk and would see this, but I think it's also doing a disservice to Trudeau himself, in the sense that by portraying him in such a light, it's making him seem like, it's almost deifying him.
The angel from above.
Holding up the concert lighter in the air, as it said.
Yeah.
And if, that does get back to Trump. And I think you said it best, only time will tell on how he will actually take it. And I think hindsight will tell us if it had any impact on the NAFTA negotiations and the softwood lumber dispute that BC Premier John Horgan's been going to Washington for, and all of the other interactions that Canada has with the United States. I mean, they're our biggest trading partner by far, and we have such a close relationship. We got the longest uninterrupted border in the world. I mean, there's such a huge relationship between Canada and the United States, and something like this where it's not even correct. It could have a huge impact on.
Yeah. And it's really laughable for the Rolling Stones' credibility.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I mean,
I don't know.
I didn't read them very much before, but I'm probably not going to read them very much now.
Yeah, when you can get something like that wrong. And, Canadians see this on the cover. And, we like being Canadian, and we might like to see our leader being portrayed positively in an international medium. But if a Canadian reads this, they're going to read the print edition, they're going to see this, and they're just going to laugh at how horribly wrong it is, which is not good. So.
Yeah, and we always want to look good in international press because a lot of people read that sort of thing, and especially with the American press. But I think if you're going to put a praising story out about Canada, it should at least be correct. I mean,
yeah.
If it's not, then people start to think, well, maybe if it's not correct, maybe they've got all these other things wrong too, and it starts to bring into question the validity of the whole story itself. And maybe Canada's not as good as it said here because they got this wrong. What else did they get wrong, sort of thing,
Indeed. All right, time for Word of the Week. You ready for this one?
I am ready and willing.
The word of the week is development, which is a noun, and it's defined as the process of developing or being developed. She traces development of the novel, the development of a less invasive treatment, or a specified state of growth or an advancement. The wings attain their full development several hours after birth, or a new and refined product or idea, or an event consisting a new stage in a changing situation. Finally, the process of converting land to a new purpose by constructing buildings or making use of its resources. And that's the main definition that I wanted to highlight here with development, specifically when it comes to our LNG story from Petronas in northern BC. And, you have raw resources and land here in Canada, and you have a huge opportunity to develop them and turn them into something profitable for the province of BC and the people of Canada. Granted, Petronas did pull out on this agreement, but when it comes down to it, it is the NDP's job in BC and the Liberals' job in Canada to ensure that we have a favorable climate for investment, which can spur development of resources and other assets in Canada. And it doesn't necessarily need to be just limited to natural resources. It could be technological development as well by focusing on research and development of the high-tech sector.
Yeah, and development of a lot of other things, such as, a developing economy and how economies can go from something that's not making much money and going into debt into something that does make money and, creates surpluses and is able to go for tax cuts for the citizens. It could be development along the tech sector, as we've said before, but it could also be housing developments and in new places for people to live, and increasing immigration, increasing the birth rate. Development can mean a lot of different things, and most of them are good, I think.
Yeah, it's very key to a successful Canada.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that is it for this episode of The Right Side. Thank you for joining us, everyone. If you want to find more, the full show notes are at rightsidenews.ca. You can subscribe at rightsidenews.ca/iTunes, and we're also on Twitter and Facebook at rightsidecA. With that being said, thank you for sharing your time with us, and we'll see you next week.
And we'll bring you more news next week for sure.